Hello YouTube. This video will take you to the ever mysterious Ural Mountains, to ancient Kyiv, Egypt and Greece. We'll show you advanced knowledge also about lost civilizations and more. There is an ancient chronicle which was compiled in Kyiv around the year of 1113. It's called The Tale of Bygone Years, in Ukrainian Povest Minulych Lit, in Russian Povest Временных Лет. In English, it's often known as the Rus Primary Chronicle, which could be translated as the Russian Primary Chronicle, or simply the Primary Chronicle. It was also called the Nestor Chronicle, because he was set to compile this Old East Slavic Chronicle, Letopis, of the so-called Kievan Rus state, Kievan ancient Russian state, although in this case we're not referring to Russia of today. And the period it covered was from about 850 to 1110 AD. The work's name originates from the opening sentence of the text, which reads, "These are the narratives of bygone years regarding the origin of the land of Rus, the first princess of Kyiv, from what source the land of Rus has its beginning." The work has long been considered to be a fundamental source in the interpretation of the history of the East Slavs. And we know the content of this very interesting chronicle, as you will see, from several surviving editions and codes that have been revised over the years and show a slight degree of variation from each other. So the historical period covered in the tales of bygone years begins with biblical times in the introductory portion of the text and concludes with the year 1117 in the Chronicle's 3rd edition. Reading it carefully, one can find truly amazing information. I'll read you from a translation of the Chronicle done decades ago and explain what one important word was not defined. And it begins like this. This is what Nestor told in the year of 6604 of the ancient Russian calendar, or 1096 AD, according to modern calendar. "I wish at this point to recount a story which I heard 4 years ago and which was told to me by Guryata Ragovich of Novgorod. I sent my servant," said he, "to the Pechera, a people who pay tribute to Novgorod. When he arrived among them, he went on among the Yugra. The latter are an alien people dwelling in the north with the Samoyeds. The Yugra said this to my servant: 'We have encountered a strange marvel with which we had not until recently been acquainted. This occurrence took place 3 years ago. There are certain mountains which slope down to an arm of the sea, and their height reaches to the heavens. Within these mountains are heard great cries and the sound of voices. Those within are cutting their way out. In that mountain a small opening has been pierced to which they converse, but their language is unintelligible. They point, however, at iron objects and make gestures as if to ask for them. If given a knife or an axe, they supply furs in return. The road to these mountains is impassable with precipice, snow and forests. Hence, we do not always reach them, and they are also far to the north.' Then I said to Guryata, 'These are the peoples shut up by Alexander of Macedon. As Methodius of Patara says of them, he penetrated the eastern countries as far as the sea called the land of the sun, and he saw their unclean people of the race of Japhet. When he beheld their uncleanliness, he marveled. They ate every nauseating thing, such as gnats, flies, cats, and serpents. They did not bury their dead, but ate them, along with the fruit of abortions, and all sorts of impure beasts. On beholding this, Alexander was afraid lest, as they multiplied, they might corrupt the earth. So he drove them to the high mountains in the regions of the north, and by God's commandment the mountains enclosed them round above, save for a space of 12 ells. Gates of brass were erected there and were covered with indestructible metal. They cannot be destroyed by fire, for it is the nature of this metal that fire cannot consume it, nor can iron take hold upon it. Hereafter, at the end of the world, 8 peoples shall come forth from the desert of Yathrib, and these corrupt nations which dwell in the northern mountains shall also issue forth at God's command. Okay. Let's leave this and look at this following. Sunklit was translated as indestructible metal. I do not know where this word comes from, Sunklit. El refers to the measure called elbow. It's an ancient measurement. The Samoyeds, the Yugra, and the city of Novgorod. Please see my videos about these peoples and location, about the city that was truly a place of ancient freedom and exploration. Please see my videos about the mysterious underground cities and civilizations, and the ancient robotic creature called the Golden Woman. I attach the URLs of the playlists. As to the high-tech knowledge and capabilities of Alexander the Great to enclose the mountains, we simply do not know. Did he have trusted advisors who gained such knowledge in ancient Egypt? Let's look at what we do know. Remember, some priests of that country possessed advanced understanding and usage of high-tech using modern words. And I'm talking about ancient Egypt. I'm certain much of it was lost during the destruction of the Alexandria Library. There's a very interesting book titled Stolen Legacy, written by George G.M. James and published in 1954. He stated the following: as regards the visits of Greek students to Egypt for the purpose of their education, the following are mentioned simply to establish the fact that Egypt was regarded as the educational center of the ancient world, and that, like the Jews, the Greeks also visited Egypt and received their education. It is said that during the reign of Amasis, Thales, who is said to have been born around 585 BC, visited Egypt and was initiated by the Egyptian priests into the mystery system and science of the Egyptians. We're also told that during his residence in Egypt, he learned astronomy, land surveying, measurements, engineering, and Egyptian theology. It is said that Pythagoras, a native of Samos, traveled frequently to Egypt for the purpose of his education. Like every aspirant, he had to secure the consent and favor of the priests, and we are informed by Diogenes that a friendship existed between Polycrates of Samos and Amasis, king of Egypt, that Polycrates gave Pythagoras letters of introduction to the king, who secured for him an introduction to the priests, first to the priest of Heliopolis, then to the priest of Memphis, and lastly to the priests of Thebes, to each of whom Pythagoras gave a silver goblet. We are also further informed through Herodotus and Pliny that after severe trials, including circumcision, had been imposed upon him by the Egyptian priests, he was finally initiated into all their secrets. That he learned the doctrine of metempsychosis, of which there was no trace before the Greek religion, that his knowledge of medicine and strict system of dietetic rules distinguished him as a product of Egypt, where medicine had attained its highest perfection, and that his attainments in geometry corresponded with the ascertained fact that Egypt was the birthplace of that science. In addition, we have the statements of Plutarch, Demetrius, and Antisthenes that Pythagoras founded the science of mathematics among the Greeks, and that he sacrificed to the Muses when the priests explained to him the properties of the right-angled triangle. Pythagoras was also trained in music by the Egyptian priests. It is my firm belief that this indeed was the great opportunity which Alexander gave Aristotle and enabled him and his pupils to carry off as many books as they wanted from the royal library and to convert it into a research center. Apart from the royal library at Alexandria, there was also another famous library nearby, the Royal Library of Thebes, the Mini Theaton, which was founded by Pharaoh Satai. The Meneptheiton was completed by Ramses II, but little occurs in history about this greatest of Egyptian royal libraries. However, any invading army would first loot the Royal Library of Alexandria and then would turn their attention to the Meneptheiton at Thebes. They would also visit the cities of Memphis and Heliopolis and likewise loot their libraries and temples. This was the ancient custom and certainly one of the ways which the Greeks received their education from Egyptians. It is therefore an erroneous belief that the Greeks on Egyptian soil and through their own native ability set up a great university at Alexandria and turned out great scholars. On the other hand, since it is a well-known fact that Egypt was the land of temples and libraries, we can see how comparatively easy it was for the Greeks to strip other Egyptian libraries of their books in order to maintain the new library at Alexandria, after it had been already looted by Aristotle and his pupils. The Greeks, that is Alexander the Great, Aristotle's school, and the succeeding Ptolemies, converted the Royal Library of Alexandria into a research center by transferring Aristotle's school and pupils from Athens to this great Egyptian library. And therefore the students who studied there received instructions from Egyptian priests and teachers until they died out. The difficulty of language and interpretation made it imperative for the Greeks to use Egyptian teachers. The Greeks did not carry culture and learning to Egypt, but found it already there and wisely settled in that country to absorb as much as possible of its culture. Alexander III of Macedon, or who commonly known as Alexander the Great, was the king of the great ancient Greek kingdom of Macedon. He was born in Pella in 356 BC. Most of his whole life was spent in military campaigns through Asia and Northeast Africa. He managed to form one of the most powerful empires in the ancient ages when he was only 30, stretching from Greece to northwest India. He is considered as one of the history's most successful military commanders. He, Basileus of Macedon, the hegemon of Hellenic League, and the Shahanshah of Persia, the Pharaoh of Egypt, and the Lord of Asia, better known as Alexander the Great, was one of the most significant figures in human history. Before I continue with Alexander, I want to tell you that in many ways I agree with the passage I read you about the Greek learning coming basically anchored in Egyptian knowledge. Of course, at this point, we only know so much, but it seems to be just and fair to attribute a lot of what they have to ancient Egypt. Of course, there were other ancient cradles of civilizations, and I've talked about them in my videos. But let's get back to Alexander. His legacy includes the cultural diffusion which his conquest engendered. He established 20 cities that carry his name. Most popular is Alexandria in Egypt. He's legendary as a classical hero in the Achilles, and he always featured importantly in the history of both Greeks and non-Greek cultures. He became an icon for the military leaders to compare with his performance. Nowadays, the military academies all over the world still teach his tactics in wars. Thus, he ranked among the most influential people in history. Well, he arrived in Egypt in 332 BC. After defeating the Persian Emperor Darius for the control of Syria and the Levant, Alexander marched to Egypt. At the time, Egypt was a satrapy in the Persian Empire, held loosely under Persian control since the decline of the ancient Egyptian Empire at the end of the 7th century BC. Alexander and his army of Greeks were regarded as liberators to cement the oracle of Amun at Siva Oasis, pronounced him the new master of the universe and a descendant of the Egyptian god Amun. Alexander did not stay in Egypt long. By 331 BC, he was on his way west to complete his conquest of the Persian Empire, but the impact of his conquest in Egypt was significant. Alexander respected Egyptian culture and religion, but he installed a Greek government to control his administration of Egypt. Greek influence in Egypt was reinforced by the settlement of Greek veterans throughout Egypt, where they became a privileged aristocracy that gradually assimilated with the Egyptians. Alexander also founded a new Greek capital, Alexandria, located on the Mediterranean at the mouth of the Nile. Although Alexander would never return to Egypt, dying in Babylon in 323 BC, the Greek rule that he established proved more than enduring. In the crisis after Alexander's death, Ptolemy, one of his generals, claimed Egypt as his kingdom and established hereditary rule. The Ptolemaic dynasty would last until the Romans conquered Egypt in 32 BC. But there is another confirmation of the story from the ancient Rus chronicles. The Shahnameh or Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, is a long epic poem written by the Persian poet Ferdowsi between around 977 and 1010 AD, and is the national epic of Iran, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan, consisting of about 50,000 two-line verses. The Shahnameh is one of the world's longest epic poems. It tells mainly the mythical and to some extent the historical past of the Persian Empire, from the creation of the world until the Muslim conquest in the 7th century. Iran, Azerbaijan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan were influenced by Persian culture. Also, other countries such as Armenia, Dagestan, Georgia, Turkey, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan celebrate this national epic. The work is of central importance to Persian culture and Persian language, regarded really as a literary masterpiece. It is also important to the contemporary adherents of Zoroastrianism, in that it traces the historical links between the beginnings of the religion and the death of the last Sasanian emperor, which brought an end to the Zoroastrian influence in Iran. So, here is the important, in our context, excerpt from that literary masterpiece. Iskander erects a barrier against the Yajuj and Majuj. Having passed the whole west, he went to the east. He sees a bright hail. For 2 miles the noblest came to meet the Lord of the earth. They appealed to the ruler with a plea, so they began to complain about their evil lot. O victorious king, find out. We're destined to have a cruel trial alone. Do you see that peak that rose up to the clouds? From there, Yajuj and Majuj threaten us. They cause us so much suffering and evil that our life has become unlucky because of them. As soon as they pour into our peaceful limit, great troubles are brought to us. The eyes are bloody, the tongue is black, and the camel's face is black, and not the face, not the teeth of the vial, but the fangs of a boar. What daredevils would go for them? The wool is indigo, thick and long. Any with elephant ears. They lay one before going to bed, they turn the other ear into a veil. 1,000 of them are born at once. No one can count the insatiable and evil. You can compare their number with herds of horses. Onagers of the steppe, They are faster in running, and their roar will reverberate in the mountains, the fear-inducing invaders. They are hungrily prowling through our fields, and they're looking for fresh shoots. That's the only way they feed from year to year. In winter, their strength is getting weaker every hour. O glorious ruler, if you find a remedy and take this calamity away from us, human rumor will magnify you, and your glory will live for centuries. Save us. So the Lord came to look at the mountain. He brought those who possessed knowledge with him. We're speaking about Alexander the Great still. The crown sage orders heavy hammers, copper and lead to be delivered, and gadja and woods and stone, everything that is needed for his bold plans. And now they have everything in abundance. And from different sides, all those who are experienced in such works, a blacksmith, a stonemason, are rushing to help the good deed. Having gathered, the craftsmen set to work, and soon 2 powerful walls rose up. They were as high as a mountain, and a good 100 rashes thick. A layer of iron in the elbow, a layer of coal above it, copper is laid between one and the other, and the sulfur layers under each lies. That's how 2 walls grew layer by layer, and soon they became equal to the mountain. Then they hurried to mix oil, petroleum, with oil, regular oil, and then pour that mixture over the walls. Meanwhile, new coal was brought, poured on the walls, and set on fire. Immediately the Lord calls the blacksmith. The fire is blown into 100,000 bellows. There are terrifying noises heard in the mountains, and the stars are thrown into fear by that flame. They have been working in harmony for a considerable time, and the walls are burning hotter and hotter, a layer of iron melted behind the copper, mixed and fused together. From now on, the country is saved from the terrible Yajuj-Majuj forever and ever. The whole region of Iskander's glorious wall was so protected from the scourge of the dashing. The gifts presented to the king were generous. He did not accept gifts. The people are amazed. The Lord went on a new campaign. So the Shahnameh reports many interesting and important details that have been lost in other chronicles. Iskander is Alexander. Onager or Onager is an animal belonging to the equine family and part of the horse genus. This is a subspecies of the kulan. Its second name is the Iranian kulan. What that mysterious gadja is, I do not know. Here's one more, but later Russian source. It was called Alexandria, novel of Alexander of Macedon, based on the Russian chronicle of the 15th century. And it was published in Moscow in the Science editorial house in 1966. This is how it is stated in the medieval text. Alexander's conquest began. The pagan peoples were frightened and fled to the north. Alexander pursued them to the high mountains, which are called the north, and finding a suitable place here, walled them up in the mountains so that they would not come out to the lands inhabited by people. Standing here, Alexander prayed like this: Great God, fulfill my request and let these 2 mountains move. God heeded, the mountains moved 12 cubits. Alexander, seeing this, glorified God and built a huge copper gate here and anointed them with Sunklit. And this Sunklit does not take fire, nor does it cut iron, or I take it that the iron doesn't cut it. Behind the gates, Alexander concluded the pagan peoples, the very Gog and Magog. So in my opinion, the ancients' new technologies were yet to discover and offer And I offer the hypothesis that ancient civilizations possessed high technologies that made it possible to engage in changing the landscape of our planet. And we're talking probably about the infrasound technologies, infrared, you name it. It's like the Vimanas in ancient India. We can only guess the extent of their development. You know what, as a diversion of sorts, I ask you to see a very strange object on the last photo in this video. After looking at this mysterious object, many have an unmistakable feeling that we're looking at an artifact of some ancient civilization, the purpose of which is very mysterious. The size of the object from ancient Egypt is about 49 centimeters in diameter and 13 centimeters in height. It weighs about 75 kilograms, based on what I know. It was created by alabaster, a material that exists only in this region of the country, and was often used to decorate various objects, including sarcophagi. The incredible artifact is absolutely unlike anything that was produced in those ancient times. Nothing like this has been discovered so far. Nothing similar. Because it has round holes and mostly unknown reliefs that experts and scientists cannot interpret even after many years of study. These characteristics make the object look like a control panel of modern aircraft. Some Egyptologists and theorists suggest that this is a copy of a much older object made of other, less weather-resistant but much more advanced materials used by deities and demi-deities, perhaps a reproduction of extraterrestrial technology observed in the past by the ancients, or perhaps technologies possessed by terrestrial civilizations that were far more advanced than ours, but that perished somewhere in history. This artifact was acquired by the Dutch Museum in 1828. However, it is not known in which temple or tomb this was discovered. As is the case with many ancient Egyptian objects, its origin, from where it was extracted, is often forgotten, but its authenticity can still be confirmed. At the moment, the artifact is in the Leiden Museum of Antiquities. It was acquired in 1828. Again, unfortunately, the place where this object was found is not known. Its authenticity, from what I understand, has been confirmed by experts in this field after many studies and evaluations. The age of the artifact is 4,500 years old and belongs to the 5th dynasty of the pharaohs of Egypt. Only a small message can be read from the hieroglyphs applied to the surface of the artifact. This tablet, according to one interpretation, was used during rituals with deceased members of the highest Egyptian hierarchy, so that they would successfully enter the underworld. Regardless of what kind of object it is, its similarity to modern equipment continues to cause confusion even among skeptics and experts who could not come up with a convincing explanation for the find. Let me add that I do not believe all of the ancient advanced civilization's knowledge and high tech has been lost. I do not. And in my videos, I have talked about those few joined into a unique society who I believe have kept it through the centuries. So I wanted to tell you this interesting fable, story, legend, or report about high technologies, very well developed, unknown to us, used by Alexander the Great to move mountains, to enclose certain peoples that he didn't like inside them, and to make sure they don't come out. And Alexander the Great has had many mysteries in his life. To the extent possible, I describe you what I know, and will continue to do so. But also this video gives me a chance to tell you about the city I was born in and lived part of my life there. Kyiv, where about 1,000 years ago Nestor wrote his chronicles and changed history. I thank you for your attention to my work. If you can support my research, you'll find the links in the description to this video. Please like this video and please tell others. Thank you.